So I think that tier lists are kind of stupid, but I was actually thinking about it, and I was thinking about doing some sort of roundup of all the major key playing headphones that I've heard, and a tier list format actually kind of works really well. So I'm going to be doing this a little bit differently than I would traditionally do this. I want to lay out exactly how I personally feel about every single one of these headphones and not really consider price as necessarily the defining feature as to how I'm categorizing these things. So if I want to put a headphone that's $30 in A tier and a headphone that's $2,000 in A tier, that's how I actually feel about each of those headphones. And normally I would restrict myself to defining certain features about it, but I'm actually going to be opening this to have any reason. So if I like the price of something, if I like the timbre or the build or whatever, this is basically a free-for-all, price no object. And if you're looking for the one video to establish how I feel about certain things, this is going to be it. I'm just going to be going in kind of a random order, just whatever I feel like talking about. Okay, a great baseline, I think is going to be the SHP 9600s. I'm going to put this in C tier. I think it represents the middle of the category. It's great price, it's great performance for that price. Doesn't really offer too many upgrades over the 9500, but still for what it costs, I think it's pretty good. And then I want to do an F tier headphone, which I'm actually going to put the Fidelio X3 there, mostly because I don't think it's worth the money. I don't see it being a good value. The problem is you can buy the X2 HR, which is the previous generation of headphone, which I think sounds a lot better and does a better job of doing what it's supposed to do at like half the cost. So I'm actually going to take the Fidelio X2 HR, which is hard to find. There it is. And I'm actually going to put this up with the 9600 in the C tier. I think it's a really good, solid mid-range headphone. Okay, a new headphone, the 5600, I'm going to put in B tier. This headphone is fantastic. It's really good on the measurement end. It also sounds really amazing. It's got good sound staging performance, really good top end clarity. For the price, it's actually one of the best headphones, especially if you're looking for a reference headphone. I think it's amazing. Overall though, compared to everything else, I do think it falls a little bit behind on certain things like sound staging. It's good for the money, but not good compared to like an HD800, for example, which I know different price ranges, but we're doing a free for all here. It does not have very good bass response, which is why it's not an A tier. Otherwise it probably would. Other than that, I think it actually competes with quite higher priced items. And I think it's really, really awesome. Okay. The Focal Clear is somewhere on here. Okay. The Focal Clear, I'm going to list as S tier. I think the Clear is the best Focal that Focal makes that I've heard. I think the Focal LX is a better value and a really good headphone, but not quite as good. And it does have a little bit more issues than the Clear does. It's not quite as awesome as the Clear. The difference is I've actually compared the Clear and the LX, and I think I picked the Clear in that video then too, even though it's a little over double the price tag actually. The reason why I like the Clear so much is because it's got really good clarity in the top end, incredible timbre characteristics, but it's an overall warmer headphone. So you get this layer of warmth and then these kind of spots that are peeking through of like really class-leading clarity. And for the price, I actually think it's a wonderful headphone, probably one of the best at it. I don't think the technical performance is as technical as some other headphones in that price category. Like for example, the HD800 soundstage far outperforms the Focal Clear and the LX. But I personally like the Clear a lot more than something like an 800. Now, speaking of the 800, I'm gonna list this as B tier. It's very good, but it's limited. The bass response is a little bit distorted and not super strong. Doesn't really compete with some of the nicer dynamics and some of the even mid-range planars for bass response. The soundstage though is simply the best on this list, I think. Yeah, I think it's probably the best. F tier is also going towards the HD820. I don't like that headphone very much. It's not very good. I much prefer the 800S. M1060s, I'm going to list as C tier. Their sound is really well put together. Slight ringing issue potentially, depending on which model you got, but still, you know, short of one issue, overall, it's an incredibly solid, good sound staging, good treble resolution, good mid-range response. It's a really good headphone, except for one small issue. It's in C tier because it's not made all that well. And as an owner, It's good to have. It's definitely fair for the money, but it's not perfect. It's not great. It doesn't go above and beyond, I don't think, than middle of the road performance nowadays. When it came out though, it'd probably a B tier, I think. Sony Z1r, I'm going to list as A tier. Technical performance doesn't quite compete with open backs, but it's probably the best closed back headphone that I've heard. So if this was just closed backs, it'd be S tier, but compared to some open backs, it doesn't quite compete, I don't think, which is keeping it from the S tier. So A tier is where the Z1R goes. Panda, which still technically isn't out yet, I'm going to list in C tier as well. The price to performance is pretty good for a closed back headphone. Doesn't compete with his upper B, A, and S tier open back headphones, I don't think. The S, A, B tiers are what I'm classifying as really good headphones that have little compromise to them. And the Panda, I think, has very little compromise for what it's functionally supposed to do, but I don't think that the sound quality quite competes, even though at the price for what it is very good. LCD4 is very good, probably the best bass response of any, close to any planar I think I've ever heard. It's quite up there in terms of cost. It costs a lot, but you get a lot for what you get, I think. And it really does hold true as one of the flagships of Odyssey. It's quite amazing, actually. Sendaiva's I'm going to put in D tier. I don't really like that headphone that much. There's a lot of like top end above 15K that kind of irritates me a little bit, and it always sounded kind of thin in the top end for some reason. Didn't really fill out the vocals as much as I wanted, and I thought it was personally overhyped. I'm also going to put two other headphones in D tier, and that's going to be the Diva and the 5XX. Basically the same headphone. They measure the same. They're made with the same, I believe, drivers, just switching the functionality of them. The Diva's cool because it's a Bluetooth capable headphone, which a lot of these are, well, most of these are not, except for the Panda. And it's unique for being an open back, more hi-fi oriented Bluetooth headphone. But I just don't like the tuning of it that much. I think it sounds a little bit lacking in dynamics, and I think that has to do with some of the thickness that they did with the magnets, making them as thin as it seems like they could. E tier is the Porta Pros. So here's the thing. Porta Pros are excellent for the price, but in comparison to all this other stuff, I don't think so. If you're asking me if I would actually rather listen to the Porta Pros than the HD820 and the X3, I genuinely actually would. Both of those headphones are kind of shrill for me, and I don't enjoy using them at all. Okay, the Odyssey LCD-X, I think, is actually on par with the LCD-4. I do think that it's not as bassy, and it's not as warm. It's not as classically warm as Odyssey's headphones normally are, but I feel like the clarity you get in the top end and the mid-range presence is also abnormal for Odyssey, but in a really good way. And that's probably the most neutral headphone that I've heard come out of Odyssey. And I actually think it sounds really fantastic. It's also got really good build quality. Instead of using a lot of wood or plastic like Odyssey uses, it uses metal for the frame and the housing. And because of that, it's really strong, they're really durable, and they don't seem to have the driver unit variation that a lot of other older school Odyssey headphones have had. Okay, now up in that vein, I'm gonna put the Diana Phi. I think that this is a really fantastic headphone. For the money, it's probably the best built headphone on this list so far in terms of quality of components that are used. It's just slightly out of my preferred tuning preference. Okay, the new GR1 I am going to put in D tier. It's a bassy headphone. It's a very, very warm headphone. It's a fun headphone. It's a good first implementation from a brand, but not my specific tuning. I like something a little bit more towards neutral, but kind of the warmer side of neutral, but not this dedicated to being a bassy headphone. I like a little bit more sound sage, a little bit more clarity, and that's kind of my ideal. So this is slightly out of what I would prefer, but still a pretty good headphone. And even though it's on the lower half of the list, it doesn't mean to say that it's terrible or bad. Okay, the next closed back headphone we're going to do is a Z7, and I'm going to put this at B tier. This is basically like actually, I don't know about better made, but it was a more comfortable ZR1 with kind of the ZR1 sound signature just miniaturized. Not quite as good as the ZR1, but a fraction of the price. And because of the tuning of that, I think it's really good, but not quite to the same level as the ZR1. Then you have the Modhouse Argons, which I think are B tier. The way that the top end pops through an overall dark picture is really still very unique. I kind of would equate it to sort of the night sky on a really clear night, where you're looking at this overall black picture, but then you've got the really bright spots, the very clear spots of the stars popping through, and the stars would basically represent the top end, you know, a little bit sparkly, very clear in the top end for the money, and but an overall darker picture. But I think it's really an enjoyable, very unique sounding headphone. Okay, the Sennheiser HE1, just reviewed that. You should check it out. Did a lot of work on that. A lot of people really liked the review, and I appreciate it. Obviously, S tier. I don't think I need to run any more in depth than that one. The Diana V2, I am also going to put in A tier. No, I'm going to actually move that to S tier. I'm going to put that and the 1266 both in S tier, even though I think the 1266 is a little bit better and it should knock the V2 down to A tier. The V2's tuning is really enjoyable, but it's the price, being almost half the price of the 1266 that I think puts it on the same level. Even though technical, well, I don't know. I don't know what to do, to be fair here. I like the V2 more than I like the Phi, and I like the 1266 more than I like the V2, but the V2 is very good value. Okay, I'll put the V2 back down to A tier just to keep the top echelon as pure as possible. Okay, the Dt80 Pros I'm going to put in C tier. I think they're very good value. I think they're a great gaming headphone. They're a little bit bright for me, but still pretty technically impressive. The treble resolution is good. The bass response is nice, and the sound staging for the money is one of the best, actually, I think. Okay, 38X, I'm going to put in B tier. I think this competes directly, actually, with the 560S, but instead of being tilted towards the cleaner version of neutral, I think it's tilted towards a slightly warmer version of neutral. So still in that mid-band for performance, but slightly warmer versus a slightly cleaner. I honestly think that this comes up to preference, but I like a little bit more bass, which the 38X offers. It also has a microphone. So, you know, it's really a toss-up of preference. I think both are equally impressive though, but in different ways, and they're coming in round about the same price. Okay, the Utopia. I personally didn't love the Utopia. It's very technically impressive, but the tuning of it just didn't do well for me, so I want to put that in B tier. So that would put the Alexa in A tier, which I actually did like the Alexa more, and then the Clear on top of both of those in the S tier. Okay, M1060 I'm going to put in E tier, but with a slight caveat. I'm actually going to put that M1060C in C tier if you open it. Like if you take the backs off, if you turn it into an open back headphone, I think it's really, really good. But as a closed headphone, I think it's an E tier headphone. I don't think it's that great. It's kind of flat, doesn't really do it for me. The Gen 2 of the Beyerdynamic T1, I think is very good. It's like a mini HD800. So I'm going to put that slightly below because it's not as good as the 800, but it is a lot cheaper. So it's very good. The main differences, honestly, like the biggest difference is the scale of the soundstage, the T1 being like 90% the size of the 800, and the S region on the 800 is more of an S, and the T1 is more of a zing. It's more of a Z sound. Hope that makes sense. Okay, DT1990, I'm going to put that in B tier. I think it's an incredible headphone, especially for studios. It's a very ultra specific headphone. The Tigers are also pretty good, but I haven't reviewed those yet, so I didn't put them on the list. And then we have a bunch of Hyperman headphones and one Odyssey headphone left. Let's do the Arias. You guys know I like my Arias, but I'm going to put it in A tier. I like them a lot. I really do. But even in the review, I recognize that they have problems, and they're, to me, very good, but clearly not as impressive as the Clear, the 1266, or the HE1. So they're very, very good, but they needed a little bit better resolution, a little bit cooler on the S's would have been nice. But other than that, I think they're a very good headphone. HE1000 SE I'm going to put in the same category because it's not the tuning I prefer, but it does have that technical precision to it. It's one of the most detailed headphones that I think are on the market right now. But it is a little bit too V-shaped for my taste, a little bit too bright to be quite S tier. Okay, and then you have the 400i, which I'm going to put in the same category as the 560S and the PC38X. Performance is exceptional. I think it's really good for the cost that it's coming in at. I think it's actually one of the better Heifmans that are out there right now in the lower end. It far outperforms, in my opinion, the 5XX. Then the Sendara, which I'm going to put actually, I'm going to put that in A tier. I think that is, like, if you're looking to spend $350, I think that is simply the best headphone you can buy. And then the LCD2C, I'm going to put that one in B tier. I think that's probably the go-to LCD for me. Like, if I'm going to recommend an LCD, I think the 2C is the one to get for like most entry-level people. And then I think the X has better performance, but it does cost more, but it is easier to drive, which is notable. And then the 4 on top of both of those, even though my personal preference for what I like the most is probably the X. So that's going to be my tier list. Thank you very much for watching. Quick question. I'm considering building a more permanent setup, and I was thinking maybe something like this, probably not with the sound panels on the ground, probably mounted up on the walls. It's simple, and I like it because it's simple, but I wonder if it's like too minimalist and maybe a little bit too boring because of that, or if the simplicity makes it look really appealing. So yeah, let me know. Okay, until the next video, my name is Josh, signing off. Bye.